Hello, my name is Isolde, and I have a bit of a reputation for talking about the very thorny women of history, and tonight is no exception. I'd like to introduce you to one of my favorite stabby women of history, Julie d'Aubigny, a 17th century bisexual French woman that flouted convention so hard that we're still talking about her scandals to this day. Expert swordswoman, notorious duelist, opera star and celebrity, and rule breaker who challenged almost every social norm in France. But before she was stage famous as Mademoiselle Maupin of the Parisian Opera, she was infamous for fighting, fencing, and another F verbing her way through France. There was no fight that she would not take on. However, let's talk about some of the Baroque 17th century cultural norms expected of women. Women, first and foremost, were expected to be submissive. They were to be submissive to God, they were to be submissive to their fathers, and then submissive to their husbands. And to their husbands, their main job was to provide sons, and a lot of grueling labor if you were a peasant. Women were considered to be the spiritual and moral anchors of the home. Only 14% of women could read, and those that were permitted to read were usually allowed to read scriptures. They could be good little Catholic wives. Legally, they were considered treated as minors. So this means that there was no property ownership, they could not sign contracts, they could not hold public office, and there were no opportunities for higher education. So this is the very rigid box that Julie was born into. However, by her birth, she had a little bit of privilege. Her father, Gaston d'Aubigny, was secretary to Louis of Lorraine, who was master of the horse to Louis XIV, the Sun King. So her father, Gaston, his job was to train court pages. So he taught them to read, some classical education, some different subjects, music, and also how to fence at court. So by 12, she had also learned to fence and was quite an expert swordswoman. Now, things got a little spicy for our girl at age 14, where her father's boss, the Count of Armagnac, decided to take her as his mistress. And of course, since women were property, also at age 14, he kept her as his mistress, but married her off to some guy, the Sieur of Maupin. And by French custom, her title became La Maupin, like the female Maupin. But her husband was hardly relevant to her story at all because he was sent to the south of France to collect tax debts while she stayed in Paris with Louis. Now, we don't know if he got tired of her wild ways or she got tired of him, but still at age 14, she ended up taking a lover named Suran, who was an assistant fencing master, she's still 14, it's a little problematic. But Suran kind of fucked up and participated in a duel where he killed a guy. And dueling was a capital offense, still is, and anyone who participated was sentenced to death, and post-mortem would have all their lands, titles, honors stripped. So Suran fled Paris, and Julie decided, still at age 14, to go with him. She dressed in men's clothes, and to make ends meet, she and Suran performed fencing exhibitions and demonstrations in town squares. They sung in taverns, they eked by. She did not hide that she was a woman and proudly declared it, even though she was wearing men's clothing. Julie was such a skilled fencer that invariably, after every bout, some dickhead in the audience would be like, "That's gotta be a man. Women should be at home birthing sons." No. So invariably, every time someone challenged her, is like, "You're not a woman," she would respond to this taunt by ripping her shirt off to prove otherwise. Still age 14, don't get too happy about it. Eventually, she tired of Suran, and she moved on to her next lady love. So this woman's name is lost to history, but she was a very nice young girl from a very nice family, and the very nice family was absolutely horrified that their daughter was shacking up with a cross-dressing illegal duelist. So they did what any nice family in France in the 17th century does, and they shipped their daughter off to a nunnery. However, time, distance, being forbidden to do something, as well as some gentle fortifications, were not going to stop Julie from being with her lady love. So a cunning plan was needed, and the plan was this. We already know that she kind of good at disguise because a lot of people thought she was a man, but she decided to disguise herself as a postulate, and she infiltrated the nunnery. So she made it to the nunnery where her girlfriend was and found her girlfriend and decided to get the girlfriend the heck out of Dodge, but needed a convincing way that no one would look for the girlfriend. So Julie's go-to plan was to steal the corpse of a deceased nun, put the corpse in the girlfriend's dormitory, light the room on fire, and escaped in the confusion. Foolproof, right? Absolutely masterful. So it didn't work. She was found out. And for the severity of her crimes, this was the first time in her life that she would be treated as a man. I'm sorry, tried as a man. Because her crimes were so horrific, no one believed that a woman would be capable of, arson, grave robbing, body snatching, and worse, failure to appear in court about it. She was tried in absentia and condemned to be burnt to death. And I mean, who hasn't desecrated the corpses of a nun to impress your teenage crush, right? Okay, I haven't done that. Well, anyway, she had to be on the run herself because the law was out to get her. So she deposited the very nice, confused young woman back with the very nice family and fled to get into more trouble. And one of these incidences of trouble, she offended someone who was kind of an important count, and he challenged her to a duel, and of course she won and pierced his shoulder with a sword. But it was okay, and there were no consequences because then they became lovers. It's fine. So there are many, many, many stories like this where she continued to engage in illegal duels, pick up lovers left and right, increasing her death toll as she ran from the law and her body count. While on the run, she even managed to take on vocal tutors with the goal of joining the opera. But she still had this pesky death warrant over her head. So if you remember this guy, the first Louis of the story, Julie reached out to her former lover and asked that he put in a good word for her with the second Louis, the king, so she could join the Parisian opera. And she ultimately did receive a royal pardon for her heinous crimes. And she joined the Parisian Opera Corps. This begins her career as an opera and celebrity singer, and the convention, regardless of marital status for opera singers and female dancers, was to go by Mademoiselle. So even though she was married, her stage title was now Mademoiselle Maupin. She was phenomenally popular. I think everyone was just a little bit in love with her. And, if you don't have a little crush on an opera singer that you know, what are you doing? Hi, Marisa, are you here? If you know, you know. Her opera celebrity really legitimized her in the eyes of society, and it elevated her, got her to all the right parties, and it kind of made people overlook her very scandalous past. She was extremely talented and purportedly had a beautiful voice, and I think originated something like 12 roles and had 17 other roles composed for her. And even though she was incredibly successful in this opera career, you can take the woman out of the fight, but you cannot take the fight out of the woman. Even in the opera world, she locked horns a few times. Case in point, Louis Delmeny had the audacity. A fellow opera singer, he had the gall to insult some other mademoiselles in the troupe, and Julie did not take kindly to this. So, dressed in her signature male garb, she dragged him out of the opera house and beat him with a cane, and, leaving him bleeding out on the sidewalk, she stole all of his valuables. The next day, he showed up black and blue to opera rehearsal, and he was so embarrassed, he concocted this wild story about having been jumped by 3 men due to the severity of his injuries. And Julie overheard this and swept in magnificently and countered, "If 3 men beat you, why do I have your snuff box and your watch?" Dumeny was humiliated, and he did not harass the other mademoiselles again. Again and again, refusing to be boxed in by expectations for women, she continued to scandalmonger. And being a part of Parisian elite society, she was invited to a social ball. At this particular ball, there was some charming young hostess that all the nobles were elbowing each other out of the way to try and flirt with and, try and pick up the most beautiful belle of the ball. And the men were so busy competing with each other and having basically a giant pissing contest about it that finally one of them was like, wait, zut alors, où est la femme? And they turn the corner and they see La Maupin and the eligible young woman pashing amorously, just making out. This grievously offended the honor of at least 3 noblemen. So 3 noblemen at that moment challenged her to a duel. And slightly later that evening, 3 noblemen were soundly defeated. Now, if you recall, dueling is a capital offense, and she had injured some pretty high-ranking people. So once again, she was on the run from the law, and she ended up establishing a career as an opera singer in Brussels. However, there weren't really consequences for this illegal duel, and she did end up returning to Paris and having more roles. So this anecdote is a little questionable because if you go online, all the sources are like, well, as sources say, some people think that this happened. So take this next story with a grain of salt. But apparently, according to some anonymous sources on the internet, King Louis was so entertained and found this hilarious that she had not only humiliated but bested 3 men in steel, that he proclaimed like, oh, silly me, I declared that men dueling is illegal. I really needed to declare men and women dueling is illegal. I pardon you. This may or may not have happened, but it's a good story. So, irrepressible Julie continued to accrue affairs and scuffles. This is just a minor selection of her lifelong troublemaking. But finally, towards the end of her life, she settled down with the most beautiful woman in France, the Madame le Marquis de Florensac, and they lived together for 2 years. And unfortunately, Mademoiselle de Florensac, she caught an illness and she passed away, and that really was the end of Julie's life. We know that she survived another 2 years after her lover passed away, but she basically died of a broken heart at the scandalously young age of 33. So I tell you not about her sad and untimely end, or not about her untimely end to make you sad, but really impressed with her colorful life and her legacy. So for my first toast, I'd like to raise a glass to an irrepressible spirit who lived with extraordinary disregard for gender and sexual norms of her time, challenging any limitations. So cheers to that. And also, I absolutely love this woman, and I made a magpie about it, which you can get at merch. And finally, for my next toast, just a little footnote for Pride Month. Julie d'Aubigny, La Maupin, openly pursued relationships with both men and women. She wore men's clothing, she challenged social conventions, and she refused to apologize for her independence. She represents a long history of people who lived beyond rigid expectations of gender and sexuality. La Maupin reminds us that queer lives and resistance to conformity have always existed, and even in eras that tried to erase them. So for my very final toast, I'd like to remind you to be unapologetically yourself, and to Julie, I'd just like to say, slay queen!